Dr. Eddie Connor is a best-selling author, international speaker, college professor, and radio TV correspondent. He is a survivor of stage 4 cancer and empowers people to overcome obstacles. As an author of 13 best-selling books, Dr. Connor has been featured and hosted segments on several major national television networks, as well as such notable shows as the Steve Harvey TV show and the Tom Joyner show. Dr. Connor is a recipient of the President Barack Obama Volunteer Service Award. And although Dr. Connor grew up in sunny Kingston, Jamaica, he is now a proud resident of, now you know, who knows what the weather will be, Detroit, Michigan. So, ladies and gentlemen of this outstanding academic institution, we welcome someone who has something in common with us: greatness, Dr. Eddie Connor Jr.
Thank you so much, Mr. Greg Dunmore. I really appreciate the raving introduction, and thank you to Wayne County Community College District for this opportunity, especially this incredible institution of higher learning. You know, I'm a living witness that none of us are strangers to struggle, because if you live long enough, and matter of fact, you don't even have to live long enough to go through something. You know that we are oftentimes introduced to pain and adversity at an early age. And I think this whole session of turning tragedy and trauma into triumph in the workplace and beyond is really going to be instrumental to your success and beyond. You know, when doubt, dismay, even being mentally discombobulated and stinking thinking is the mode of our mindset, then really that becomes the primary focus and the thought process for our lives. As a result, we presently live in the past because we have unhealed trauma. And many times we are psychologically incarcerated. We are dealing with emotional incarceration because of the unhealed trauma and the wounds that we have not identified, much less remedied. And one thing I'm beginning to understand is that when we have unhealed trauma that has gone untreated and has not been resolved, this is what we do. We bleed on people who didn't even cut us. When we have unhealed trauma, we cut ourselves and others with stinking thinking, with negative words, with mistreatment, because we operate out of hurt. And the thing is, hurting people hurt people, but only healed people heal people. Words of self-doubt and dismay become our lot in life. When we have unhealed trauma, we pair bond with people who reflect our trauma. We trauma bond as a result. Dr. Joy DeGroy, in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, shares about the wounds we carry in our DNA from our ancestors, from subjugation of our race, abuse, neglect, painful experiences and hurt that manifest and even metastasizes inside in a group of people, but still feeling alone. Many times we have gone through situations that become, we're living through PTSD. PTSD being post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a mental health disorder that can oftentimes develop following exposure to a traumatic event. Neighborhoods that have dilapidated housing give you PTSD. The sounds of gunshots can give you PTSD. Having your heart broken over and over and over again can give you PTSD. Sexual assault, war and combat, violence and crime, an accident, death or injury of a loved one, domestic violence. All of those aspects can give us that PTSD experience, to where now we are triggered based upon the trauma we have experienced. Symptoms of PTSD can range considerably in their severity, and oftentimes they fall into these 4 categories. One being intrusion, which is repeated flashbacks. You're having nightmares, the involuntary recall of the event. Secondly, there's changes in thinking. Changes in thinking now affects and alters your mood. That can lead to loss of memory. It's blocking out maybe the painful experiences of what it is that you have gone through: depression, fear, shame, guilt, self blame, self criticism of the event because of what has taken place in your life. Thirdly, there's changes in reaction because of what has transpired in your life. Now you're on edge. You're frequently irritable. You're prone to angry outbursts. You're unable to relax, maybe having difficulty concentrating or sleeping. Now dealing with issues in the whole aspect of how you handle things emotionally intelligent. And then there's the last one, which is avoidance. Avoidance is about trying to block out and trying to refuse to even think about the issue that has taken place. You don't want to deal with it. You want to wash your hands of it. You don't want any, the mention of it is detestable to you. And oftentimes we operate in a place of avoidance because of the experience that we have gone through. But we can't numb it. We must acknowledge it. I like to say, how can you heal from what you won't deal with? How can you address what you won't confess? We can't numb it. We have to acknowledge it and deal with it. And when you think about trauma, a lot of times that word is thrown around a lot. But trauma, we have to get a real clear definition of it. Trauma it's an emotional response to a terrible event, such as an accident or abuse. And generally, immediately after the event, there is shock, there is awe, there is denial. That is oftentimes very typical. Long-term reactions include unpredictable emotions. You're having flashbacks. Relationships can be strained. Physical symptoms can now transition and transpire into headaches or nausea. 3 types of trauma. You've got acute, you've got chronic, you've got complex. Acute trauma is from a single event. Chronic trauma is repeated, it's prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse that continues on for a span of time. Then there's complex trauma. It's exposure to variegated and a variety of traumatic events. It's one thing after the other. It's an accident, it's abuse, it's mistreatment, it's misfortunate events that transpire and take place, which can now lead to complexities interpersonally. Based upon trauma, certain things now transpire with triggers. You think about trauma and triggers, it's TNT. It becomes explosive. And really a trigger is a person, it's a place, it's a feeling, it's a thing. It can be a noun, a pronoun that induces a stress-based physical or emotional response based on post-traumatic experience. Triggers can now lead to stress. It can now lead to anxiety. Anxiety can now build up into anger. It can lead to sadness. All of those things have root causes because of the traumatic experiences that we have gone through. Maybe you're watching, as you're watching, maybe you're taking notes. And I want you to answer some of these questions. What are my triggers? As I'm talking, I want you to begin thinking and writing. What types of situations trigger me? What are my triggers? What types of situations am I in? What thoughts and emotions am I experiencing? When I'm triggered, what does my body feel like? We have to think about what takes place because oftentimes what we go through becomes psychosomatic. What we experience in here affects us internally in our body. What I'm experiencing in my brain affects me physically. Common triggers are oftentimes many of the things that I mentioned: anger, the memories, the loneliness, the sadness, the anxiety, the frustration, the tension, maybe feeling out of control, the pain. Those can be internal triggers. Oftentimes, the internal triggers are stimulated by external circumstances, a breakup, or end of a relationship, certain news that you may hear, generally that being bad, anniversaries. It could be the smell of someone's perfume or their cologne, and now it elicits a memory that could bring up a bad vibe or a negative omen. Specific places that you may go to, witnessing another accident or similar event, maybe going to a funeral. Now it triggers you. The hearing about the death of a friend or a loved one. Now you're triggered again because you think about the death of the person who was so closest to you when you were growing up. Holidays, arguments, seeing people that remind you of that particular event. Maybe it's a movie scene. Maybe it's a passage in a book that reminds you of something that you experienced. And one thing is that we have to do, we have to identify it. We have to identify it not from a place of anger or irritability. We have to identify it so that we can gain control of it. We have to identify the key changes that are in our mood, the disassociation, where our mind distances ourselves, our mind distances itself from the body, feeling foggy, feeling disconnected, reliving the experience, going through the anxiety. Maybe there's, because of the anxiety, now there's trouble sleeping. You're now feeling internal rejection internally on the inside. Because the thing is, trauma has an effect on the mind, the body, and the spirit, to where many people reduce who they are because they don't feel deserving of the best. Based upon it, now we settle for what we were never supposed to have in the first place. We've got to be aware of trauma symptomology, symptomatology rather, in the aspect of the short-term, but also the long-term effects of what it is that we have experienced. All of those things that we internalize, and sometimes we don't even know how to verbalize, we just internalize. But if we don't remedy what we internalize, as I said before, we now bleed on people who didn't cut us. We now speak to our coworkers a different type of way, in a negative way. We now approach our customers and our clientele and our professors and our fellow colleagues and our peers negatively because we're carrying trauma that has not been dealt with. And now we hemorrhage on other people who only have an intention to help us. As I pretty much wrap up here, we have to identify how to break through what's breaking us. I just want to give you just a few trauma triggers and methods to manage that. Because with time and practice, it is possible to disrupt what disrupts us, to counteract the impact of triggers that we experience. One is that we have to be aware of what is happening. When you start to feel a certain trigger response, you have to name the trigger. What is happening in your body? What is going on in your mind? How is it affecting you emotionally? Ways to do that: you may journal, taking some time for meditation and mindfulness. Secondly, being kind to yourself. You got to remind yourself that you're in a healing process. Healing does not happen episodically. It's not just a one-stop shop process. It's a through duration of time. Sometimes the process requires time, sometimes it requires rest. You got to honor your humanity. You have to honor your emotions. You've got to be gentle with yourself as you move through, as you grow through what you go through. You have to pay attention to what you need that will help you alleviate stress. Hopefully that being which is not deleterious to your body, much less your mind as well. Thirdly, you got to be grounded. Based upon your root will dictate your fruit. You got to root yourself in the reality and the safety of the present moment with some techniques that are going to relax you, that are going to refresh you, that are going to revitalize you and are going to rejuvenate you, to not be reactive, but to be proactive. Number 4, be supported. Healing from trauma is like healing from an injury. It's an illness, healing from a disease. You got to be around healthcare professionals. You got to be around individuals who can sharpen you, who can speak life into you, who can encourage you. But you also have to understand that you're the CEO of your own life, not just chief executive officer, but chief encouraging officer. What are the words that you're saying to you about you? You've got to participate in your own healing. Number 5, you got to validate your experience. What you have experienced is real. What you have experienced, yes, is hurtful, it's painful. You can't allow anybody to diminish your experience. We can all go through the same thing and feel something different. I may not feel what you feel, you may not feel what I feel, but it's not right for me to invalidate your experience and vice versa. The whole aspect is is not that there's anything wrong with you. You just have to target what it is that is affecting you. And it's important to remind yourself, it's important to self-validate yourself in the midst of the tempestuous storm of what it is that you experience. I had to validate my experience when I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, when my own biological father never visited me one day in the hospital, when I lost my hair because of chemotherapy, radiation, when I felt like giving up, when the people I thought were praying for me were literally praying on me, sitting on the sideline expecting my demise. I couldn't give up. Yes, cancer made me cry, but it didn't make me quit. In the midst of the deleterious depression, the mental discombobulation, I had to find determination, hope inside, and find the canning cancer. Sometimes you also have to just take a deep breath. You got to breathe a little bit slowly. Sometimes we're getting into a place to where we're so focused to where our blood pressure goes up. But sometimes we just need to take some time to just calm ourselves, soothe our anxiety, and really minimize our pain. Number 7, think positively for 12 seconds. Why do I say that? Because neuropsychologist Dr. Rick Hansen said it only takes 12 seconds for the creation of new neuron connections. Take some time to think about a beautiful flower, a sunset, a smile on someone's face, or a compliment from a friend or a loved one or a colleague. Think about the sun seemingly cascading into the ocean. You're hearing the ocean hit up against the rocks, and just the refreshing wind that blows into your hair or right across your face. Think about something that's going to take your mind out of the experience that is bad and place it into a place that is good. It only takes 12 seconds to do it. I challenge you to see what will happen as a result of it. Last but not least, laugh. Research indicates that laughter really is medicine and is now being used more than ever before as a therapeutic method. Laughter boosts your immune system. Laughter rewires your brain. It takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. Check out a funny video. Watch a funny movie. Take your mind to a different place. Spend time with someone who's going to rejuvenate you, who's going to revive you, who's going to refresh you, who's going to make you feel safe, and is going to make you laugh. Combine all of that with soft music, deep breathing exercises, mindfulness, a good book, self-care, journaling, therapeutic massage, anything that's going to take your life to the next level, simply because you can turn tragedy and trauma into triumph in any space, particularly the workplace. Somebody's waiting on you to be who you are so they can become who they're supposed to be. Go forward, make it happen. Appreciate you.
Wow. I'm just taking a few seconds, Dr. Connor, to it's uplifted by the fact that although I may not become the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation, but I can become the CEO of something that is even more priceless and more valuable in a company, and that is the chief encouraging officer, as you said, of life and the lives of the people, be they in the workplace or at home. So I thank you for what I like to call very nutritious food for thoughts. Dr. Connor, what inspired you to pursue a career in making people feel better, both spiritually and mentally?
Powerful question. I would say, probably because of everything that I had to go through, the trials and the tempestuous trauma of what I had to heal from, the emotional incarceration, the psychological pain, because I was locked up. I didn't want to tell anybody about what I had gone through with cancer. I don't really want to forgive my father, who had never visited me one day in the hospital. And I had to realize I had to forgive to live. And based upon me healing and freeing myself, I was able to help empower others, and that being my work today.
Fantastic. Tragedy, trauma, and then we have triumph. So we've got two negatives: tragedy, trauma, and then we go into triumph. Can you think of another T word that shows your high emotional intelligence to complement triumph?
Definitely testimony. There's no testimony without a test. Your misery becomes ministry, your mess becomes a message. You can use your setback to bounce back. The Big Sean, the rapper, said, "Last night took a L, but tonight I bounced back." And so being able to take a knockdown, and understand a knockdown is not a knockout unless you stay down. You can get back up again, and you can really find your testimony and be able to empower somebody as a result of it.
And my T word would be tragedy, trauma, triumph, and togetherness.
I like that
word, because together we always rise when we're a collective group of people that we encourage at WCCCD, because together we're always stronger. So we're going to balance that tragedy, trauma, triumph, testimony, and my T word, togetherness.
You giving us teachable moments.
Yes. Is it healthier to bring your problems into the workplace or leave them at home if that's really where they originated?
I think it's a fine line. I think when you talk about even togetherness, being able to recognize that us at this job or in this workplace, in this particular environment, we need to come together as a family. Teamwork makes the dream work. We're better together. Sometimes there are issues that are pervasive so much that you, as best as you can, try to leave it at home. You try to mask it. And somebody who's really in touch emotionally, or who knows you maybe more than another colleague, says something's not right. Something's wrong with you today. And you say, "Well, no, I'm okay. I'm all right." But they want to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm here to be a sounding board, not necessarily to give you advice. I'm here to be a listening ear." Sometimes there's a fine line between that, to where you can't always leave it at home, but the workspace and place needs to become a second home, to where you cannot be judged because of what it is that you're experiencing, but you're able to break down that issue and to really help somebody, or find help to remedy what it is that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I talk about the workplace as a community, as an extension of your family, is that yin and yang. When the home is uplifting, then we know that increases the odds that our experience at work is going to be a more positive experience, and vice versa. When the work experience is encouraging and dynamic, it is also a reflection of what we're able to bring into our home. So it is that yin and yang. It is the complement that comes from knowing that these two all-important environments must be healthy and uplifting. In your opinion, Dr. Connor, is peer counseling among coworkers more effective between genders? In other words, do men relate more to other men, as well as women relating to other women, when giving advice and helping to relieve stress associated with tragedy and trauma that often is a result of it? So do you really see gender situations, or is it just whoever, whenever, however?
I think each one can reach one, but I believe there are some things that men can impress upon men that we speak each other's language and we understand. Same thing with women when they talk with one another. Sometimes whether it's through mentorship, whether it's through a word of encouragement, whether it is through helping you to overcome a certain stumbling block, sometimes a brother needs to just talk to another brother. Scripture says iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. Not that, a woman can't take advice from a man can't take advice from a woman, but sometimes you just need somebody who's in the particular predicament, space, or place that it is that you are, who can really feed your spirit at that time.
Yes, and I want the people who are listening to know that all of you have something that is unique to your experience, that you can be involved in the process of uplifting someone else. Once again, we are all capable of being CEOs, chief encouraging officers in the lives of people around us. So we don't ever want to downplay the importance of what that means. What are the three things we should underscore not to do when navigating through stress that comes from trying to cope with a tragedy or a traumatic situation?
Well, I would say, projecting our anger and our animosity onto somebody else. A lot of times we're blame shifting and trying to find somebody who's at fault for what it is that we're going through. And a lot of times we lash out on the people who are closest to us. I would say, secondly, one thing that we should not do is turn on ourselves. Oftentimes, the greatest enemy is the inner me, but really we should become our best friends, and we should recognize that there are resources, there's knowledge and wisdom inside of us to help us get through it. Thirdly, I would say recognizing that stress is not going to be the portal for the answer. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was telling me how stressed he is. I said, "Hey, bruh, stress is not going to resolve the issue. Sometimes you have to step back from it. You have to loosen and let it go. You have to sleep on it. You have to be pragmatic and proactive about it, and you'll recognize that you will get through this. But don't allow stress to stop you from moving forward."
And there's a concept too that I, in my research, thought was very curious, that there's something called toxic positivity. And that is, we are so gung-ho that, and we know that when a person is going through stress, that certainly you want to cheer them up. Laughter is important, but it's all right to recognize the fact that pain does produce sorrow. And you've got to sometimes temper it when you speak to someone who you know has gone through something traumatic, that it's all right to understand that sadness is part of the healing. And so we don't want to be so dismissive of the fact that the pain that one feels is real, and to acknowledge that is not a negativity, but as I said earlier, and we know the importance of this too shall pass. So we have to be aware of things not to do, as well as all the wonderful things that we've talked about that are healing and important to underscore in whatever relationship you have with people, be it in your workplace or outside the workplace. How do you best prepare our children to be good supporters without the threat of highlighting the pain and suffering that comes from adult-centered tragedy and trauma, without compromising their childhood innocence? What do you say, Dr. Connor, are some things that we can do to encourage children to know that they should be sensitive and involved in this healing when people are going through very sad times?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One thing I think we have to do is validate the human experience that our children have. What they experience and what they feel is real. If something is wrong that they have incurred or experienced, we have to not just shun them or throw them away or ask them what did they do wrong, but we have to validate their experience. I think one thing as well, and I mentor young men all the time, is to talk about the whole aspect of emotional management and emotional intelligence, and not necessarily operating out of anger, because anger is just one letter away from danger, but being able to manage their emotions, not as a man being a boy, but as a healthy young boy. What does a healthy young boy do? What does a healthy young girl do? How can she assist in this particular aspect if she sees or he sees one of his classmates or peers uh, hurt, sad, not to bully, not to laugh, but actually to bear the burdens of one another. And so, training our young people to be emotionally sensitive as well as responsive, I think brings proactive healing, and really makes us all better citizens.
Yes, I totally agree. And as I said earlier, childhood has such a dramatic effect on how we're able to transition into adulthood, and learning to be responsible and caring and knowing to be sensitive as a child is a plus. And to encourage that is to produce a young person that will grow into the sort of person that you hope will be in your workplace, in your personal space. Dr. In 30 seconds or less, speak to someone who the Spirit is saying at this moment they need to hear whatever spiritually you're motivated to tell them based on tragedy, trauma, and triumph.
Absolutely. The tragedy, triumph, and tragedy and tests that you go through become a triumphant aspect to be able to learn. The life is a classroom. There's always a lesson, and in midst of the lesson, there's a blessing. One thing we can't do is lean to our own understanding, because we'll fall. I believe you have to trust God through the process. We have to grow through what we go through and understand that is not always asking why, but what am I supposed to learn in the midst of this situation? Because sometimes you go through some things so that you can help somebody else get out of those same things and create opportunities that are teachable moments. Don't give up, brush your shoulders off, keep looking up. If you can look up, you can get up.
So true. Now, we've got some questions from this wonderful group of participants that are listening. And just in case we don't answer your question, if you send something to us to answer, Dr. Connor, do you mind if I send the question to you and you'll get back to the person just in case they feel that their question was not answered?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I am really shy, and whenever I feel I should say something to someone I know has experienced some type of tragedy, I clam up and don't say anything. Please give me some advice on what to do.
I would say, because a lot of times we're focusing on, we don't want to say the wrong thing. And sometimes not saying anything can be the wrong thing. I would try to put myself in that individual's shoes as best as possible, and just not communicate so much from your head, but focus on your heart. Communicate from a place of authenticity and vulnerability, and the message that you give, most assuredly, I'm sure it'll be received with TLC, with tender love and care, because that's what flows from you.
Yes. I am a very religious person, and I know the power of prayer. Is it incorrect, especially on the job, to ask someone to pray with them?
I don't necessarily think so. I think there's a time and place for everything. When is it happening? Maybe sometimes you just have to pull yourself over to the side with someone, and you're doing it in the hallway. It's the Lord's Prayer is only 30 seconds. So everything doesn't always have to be 5-minute prayers, so on and so forth. From your religious aspect, God knows your heart, and He can be able to, understand that prayer is not necessarily always time-based. but it's from a tender aspect of communication and conversation to repair the breach.
I totally agree. You know, I've got a good friend, and she asks me all the time, and I know her well. Do you mind if I pray? Do you mind if we pray? And I always an odd question, because for me, it's like, do you mind if I smile at you? Do you mind if I do something nice? But that is true, that I suppose that one has to know the individual, and you can ask the person, but if the spirit is telling you that this is something that you have to do, I always think that you should move on what the spirit tells you to do. I sometimes find myself seeming more affected by hearing bad news about others than the affected person seems in handling their own problems. How do I handle my oversensitivity to other folks in crisis? This person has asked me.
How do they handle their oversensitivity to others in crisis? Well, as an individual, as I'm listening, that person is very empathetic. You know, they're a feeler. They oftentimes wear their heart in their sleeve, and you know, they're a person who bears the burdens of others, and being a highly sensitive individual, we need more of that, because so many individuals so desensitized to all the trauma, all the tragedy, all the negativity that is taking place in their world, and they just go through life numb. And so I think being able to uh, manage that emotion of what it is, because sometimes we can be so emotional that we're not rational, but being able to look at that emotion and see, what can I do about this, because this is how I'm feeling about this individual. How can I help bear the burdens of whatever it is this individual is experiencing, what they're going through. So I would just say being able to unpack that to where what you're experiencing does not remain in you, but you're also able to unpack it in a healthy way.
Yes, I totally agree. To be oversensitive means that you have sensitivity to spare, and to share that sensitivity to encourage another person is a good thing. But I do understand that there are people that take on the burdens of the world, and when they hear about negative things, they themselves become even more affected, and it has to be dealt with, of course. This person wants to know, Dr. Connor, can you recommend any good book to read on how to cope and deal with tragedy and trauma, be it your own or others?
Oh, absolutely. I would say the book by Dr. Joy DeGroy that I mentioned earlier, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She talks about the emotional incarceration that oftentimes we experience, how to deal with tragedy, how to unpack it. There's also a book that I think is very, very pertinent for the mind, called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Very, very short read, but it's a powerful read. He likens the mind to a garden. If you plant seeds of negativity, it's going to reap weeds of worry. Seeds of strength will reap a harvest of blessing. So those are two books.
Fantastic. Dr. Connor, how do you suggest someone talks about the delicate topic in many cases, the awkward topic in many cases, because of this taboo of people not understanding the importance of seeking out professional help, seeing a psychologist, a therapist, a psychiatrist? But how do you suggest, this person is asking, that someone needs to seek professional help as a therapist or psychologist? How should they introduce that, maybe as an option, as a suggestion?
Absolutely. I think you said something very, very profound. You know, if you have something wrong with your foot, you go see a podiatrist. You know, you want to get a checkup, you go to your physician. You want to, you know, do some dental work, you go to your orthodontist. I think when we think about counseling and therapy, although it may still be taboo, it's still for me and you. If you're going to be successful in life, you have to have a coach. As great as Michael Jordan was, he couldn't really be as great if he did not have a surrounding support system. much less a coach that could help him to overcome certain hurdles. And I think one thing is when we approach counseling and therapy more so from a level of a coach versus something wrong with us, versus actually how to remedy what is right with us and to really perfect our challenges, our strengths, and to grow better, we'll understand that it's not that there's something wrong, but it's something right, and we can take down the ego, let the ego go, and take the pride down to understand that we can just surround ourselves with supporters.
Yes, indeed so. This person wants to know, is there a timeline for dealing with tragedy and traumatic situations at work? I know when it first happens, one is expected to react, but when should one move on in addressing it, especially with a coworker?
I think, I don't know if there is a timeline for dealing with tragedy. I think it's TBD. It's to be determined. I think you have to be able to set healthy boundaries, parameters, and be able to talk with someone at your job and your workplace and space about what it is that you may be experiencing, and that maybe, hey, you may need some time off because it is, deleterious. It is affecting your work because your mind is not there. You've disassociated the job from what you do and who you are. So I think, if it is an impending situation, you do have to talk to somebody to really see how you can remedy that and how they can work with you.
Indeed so. This person wants to know, oh, wow, this is one of my favorite things to do, but still, this is a very important question. What about hugging in the workplace? I sometimes feel, based on everything I'm now hearing about personal space issues, that I am doing something wrong when I think a good old-fashioned hug is all right to give. Your thoughts, Dr. Connor?
Well, as it seems as if we are kind of getting back to life as we know it, COVID-19 taught us something. I think it is, can you touch somebody without touching somebody? Can you be there without being there? Can you literally touch somebody's heart without using your hands? And I think one thing is that we always have to develop relationship. Some people are very touchy-feely. Others have a little personal bubble and they don't want that bubble bursted at all. So I think it's all really about developing relationship and seeing what is somebody's love language. Somebody may have a love language of acts of kindness and service. Somebody may have a love language of gifts. Somebody may have a love language of touch. Somebody, may not have that at all. So I think it's beyond just going up and hugging folks, being able to get to know them first and, seeing how they approach human contact. Because, everything is very, very touchy-feely these days. And some people just are not touchy-feely at all. So I think it's just about getting to know people, what they like, what they dislike. And based on doing that, how to approach them.
Dr. Connor, I am honored. We're honored that you have addressed this stellar group of people at WCCCD. So I'm going to ask you to come back at another time because you, sir, are a blessing to this community and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.